Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Low Production Value Sphere podcast, which is shot from my Supervillain Lair underneath Fordo Mountain. As you can see, it's very bright because somebody poked holes in the ceiling recently. I have a very good guest with me this time that I'm very excited to talk to because he is honestly the smartest and best person I've talked to, I think, ever when it comes to issues of manufacturing and reshoring. And I'm talking about the great Harry Moser, who is the founder and director of something called the Reshoring Initiative. Harry's a great guy, very smart guy, bachelor and master's from MIT, back when that meant something. Actually, for MIT, it still does. And then he used to run like a real American manufacturing company. So he actually worked in the real world. And then instead of retiring on some island somewhere, he decided to try to actually do something about the decline of American manufacturing. And so he started the Reshoring Initiative. So, Harry, why don't you start by telling us what the Reshoring Initiative is and what it offers companies, why it's more than just a think tank?
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. First, it's great to be here, and your kind words are perhaps a little too much, but I'll do my best to live up to them. The Reshoring Initiative is a nonprofit. I founded in 2010, and the mission is to balance the goods trade deficit that last year was $1.2 trillion dollars. And to balance it would take about a 40% increase in U.S. manufacturing. So, a huge challenge. The way we do that, we document the trend. We're the only source of data on the trend. We promote it, articles, podcasts, interviews, things like this, like we're doing today. Thank you, and we enable it. So we provide tools that help companies decide to reshore or evaluate whether to reshore, to help them quantify the advantages of bringing the work back.
Yeah, the tools are great and fascinating, but we already did an interview about that, so I'm going to link it in the comments. The reason I wanted to have you on again is because in the time since we last spoke, I don't know if you heard, but there was an election in the U.S. and then a
Yes.
couple things happened. So I wanted to have you on to discuss this sort of broad, universe of everything that's happened with regard to Trump administration policies and reshoring and manufacturing. And so I understand that you have a new reshoring survey, which which is relevant to this and which can help frame our discussion.
Correct. We surveyed 500 companies and we got a combination of big companies. I call them OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, think General Motors, but also contract manufacturers. So the machine shops, the foundries, the people like that make the components for the big companies. And so we got the view of both of them on uh, things like tariffs and reshoring and offshoring and what they've done and what it will take to get them to do more. So we tried to be very timely in considering what's actually happening in Washington.
Okay. And so, I mean, I guess the first question I want to ask someone like you who's actually in the real world, which is what do you hear when you talk to actual manufacturers, people who run the business? Are they saying, oh, it's a catastrophe because those tariffs, that they make it impossible to run a business? Are they saying, oh, this is amazing, we're making things in America again? Are they saying, you know, it's difficult in the short term because there's a lot of disruption, but we think over the long term things are going to improve? Or, you know,
I
what's
understand.
the feeling on the ground for people who are actually in this?
It certainly makes a difference if you're talking about manufacturers versus, say, retailers. And retailers are obviously concerned because their costs are going to go up. And they may have to change suppliers, all kinds of things like that. For manufacturers, it depends whether the manufacturer is manufacturing here or manufacturing somewhere else and importing. Okay. So it depends whose ox is being gored, so to speak. But overall, just in general, I'd say most of them, their business is not bad. It's pretty much okay right now, but they're concerned about the uncertainty for the future. Those that have tried to be objective and look at what could actually happen with the tariffs, the best estimates say that tariffs would increase. The tariffs, like they look like they're going to wind up, the 10,
Right.
15% tariffs plus 30, 40 on China, something like that, would increase the CPI by maybe 1% or 1.5%. And that's, it's painful, a little bit painful, but it's not catastrophic.
Right.
And so from my viewpoint, the media and the financial firms overstated the likely impact of tariffs, driving this uncertainty and fear. It was they caused as much problems as the chaotic nature of the
Right.
implementation of the tariffs did, and and so and the one thing that bothered me is that when you'd get all these articles from top economists, from learned, smarter people than I am, and they attack the details. But but they should have embraced the objective. If they had started their articles by saying
Right.
it's absolutely necessary that the U.S. brings back its manufacturing, and we're going to argue about the details of how to get it done, but it's absolutely good job, good job that you're doing this. Let's
Right.
discuss how to do it. Then I think we would have had a very different emotional climate in the country, and so I blame the media, a lot of the economists, the associations, some of them on doing this. Just for reference, back in April, I predicted that we'd wind up with 25 to 50% tariffs on China, 10 to 15% on most other countries, somewhat higher on steel and autos, some restrictions on China shipping through other countries. So more or less the way it looks like it's probably
Right.
going to turn out. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I guess my next question is exactly about this. Like, what do you think about the tariffs? Because last time we spoke, you were sort of moderately pro tariff. You were like, tariffs are good, but actually, it would be better to have a VAT or something like that. So it. Do you think the current policy is good? Do you think it's too unpredictable right now? What's your opinion?
First, as we probably discussed last time, you have to understand the root cause of our trade deficit, which again is
Right.
what I'm attacking, what President Trump's attacking, and the root cause is that the U.S. manufacturing cost is consistently too high relative to almost every other country in the world. So it's
Right.
not just China; it's Germany and France and Italy and Spain and countries that you wouldn't think we'd have a trade deficit with. We've got a trade deficit with 9 out of 10 of our largest trading partners. The only exception being the UK, which saw its best days, 200 years ago or something like that. And so um, we say that the correct industrial policy, an optimal industrial policy, would be first skilled workforce, to have the quantity and quality, to be more like Germany in terms of the apprenticeship system, to lower the U.S. dollar. Now the dollar has already come down about 10% from its
Yep.
peak. Okay, and we're starting to see companies say that they're exporting more because they're now more price competitive. So, and we expect to start seeing a lot of reshoring cases because where companies are reshoring because their domestic production is now more price competitive, and price is the
Okay.
deciding factor.
That's fascinating. So we'll talk about the workforce skills thing because it's extremely important, I know. But I just want to jump on what you just said. Okay, so some companies are indeed reshoring. Is there, is there are is there a standout? Is there a thing in common among those companies? Are they in a particular industry or a particular part of the value chain or
I understand. The big announcements, the ones you see, are the big companies because they get the headlines. And I've got a list of about 40 big projects that, typically $1 billion, $2 billion or more projects, 1,000 people, a couple thousand people, and that have been announced since uh, April 2nd. Okay.
yeah.
And And in terms of industry, there's a lot of automotive, some of which saying, well, it looks like we're going to make them in the U.S. instead of Mexico
Right.
because of the tariffs on Mexico. Okay? There's a lot of pharma, and I think the pharma is
Interesting.
partially due to the tariffs on pharma, potential tariffs on pharma, but also I think they're trying to get on the good side of the administration to avoid or minimize the effect of the balancing of U.S. farmer prices relative to our peer countries. You know, the fact that we're
Right.
twice as high as they are. So I think they're trying to get some goodwill there. There's steel, a couple of steel companies, so a lot of appliance companies. But one of the key themes throughout their announcements, you can read it or you can read it between the lines, is we're announcing this, but we're not going to start on it until the tariffs firm up and we know what they are, how much they are from each
Right.
country.
Right.
Because if you're a president of a company and you announce $1 billion investment, you start digging and you're pouring money into this hole,
Right.
and then the tariffs go away, you're looking for a job.
Right.
so okay, to me, the biggest priority for Trump is to firm them up, get them real, settle for 10%, 15%, something in that order. Don't drag this on for another 3 or 4 months because all
Okay.
these actions won't happen. And he needs those jobs to be starting to get announced to
Right.
strengthen his position on everything else.
Right. Okay. So okay, that's a very good or interesting anyway, like heuristic. It's like better to settle for 10% now and you know it's going to stay in the future than sort of hold out for 15% with lots of disruptions and uncertainty.
Yeah. The other
Or
thing is,
whatever your number is, but
yeah,
that should be the philosophy.
yeah. The other thing though is it it shouldn't ideally it should not just be a Trump announcement of a tariff. It should be something that he can push through Congress and have Congress vote on and approve,
Well,
so
that's,
that at the mid-year elections, if he loses control of the House and the Senate, that they can't force him to rescind the
yep.
tariffs, or the next president can't reverse them. And so
Yep.
you'd like to get it as tough and as firm and as locked in as you can. And if you do that, then it'll be the wonderful, beautiful tariffs.
Yeah, well, I mean, Congress is a different thing, right? They wanted to put the tariffs in the big beautiful bill and they couldn't, um, because they don't have the votes in the Senate. They probably would in the House, but they don't have them in the Senate. But yeah, okay, fair enough. Speaking of the big beautiful bill, my next question about this. So I don't know if you've looked much at it, but it had tax provisions, and like a lot of these tax provisions are on the consumer side. It's like no taxes on tips, whatever. Although no tax on overtime might be significant. But there's also corporate tax cuts, and in particular, there's accelerated depreciation, including for physical plant. A lot of the tax wonks that I talk to are super excited about this because they think it's going to, lead to a great investment boom because, of course, you can write off the entire cost of an investment project on day one instead of amortizing it over the life of the project. Uh, do you think that matters? Do you think it's not going to matter?
Yeah,
I look at your face and
Uh,
I'm not
I,
optimistic.
oh, I should be. I've been a proponent of immediate expensing, which is what we're talking about,
Right.
for 30 years. When I ran the company, the machine tool company, I used to. When that was offered, it would come in for 6 months or so, and I'd have the
Right.
salesman report to me on every order they got that was
Right.
because of and I got a lot of data. I fed it back to the Federal Reserve. Other people would call the Federal Reserve, and the Fed would send them to me as the expert on immediate expensing. Okay? and uh, and so I believe in it. Um, but Okay, and it doesn't cost much because if you think about
Right.
what it is, it's really a loan from the federal government of the taxes that are saved by the immediate expensing for on average, let's say 3 years.
Yeah.
And so it's not they're not giving out money. In effect they're loaning money. And so somebody asked me about it a couple of days ago, and I calculated that at most it was the equivalent of a 1% tax rate reduction or something like that. It isn't anywhere near as big as the 21% going down to 15% kind of thing.
Right.
So but it's it's psychologically impactful even
Yeah.
more than economic,
Yeah.
and I think it works especially well on privately owned companies, the supply chain companies. So if you're a machine shop, a foundry, something like that, 100 people, something like that, 20 million a year, and the accountant comes to you in November and says, "Boss, we're going to pay a lot of taxes this year." The owner says, "What can we do?" Well, you could buy that equipment, that $1 million worth of equipment you were talking about getting and that you need, get it in here. You got to get it in by December 31st and to get it running because otherwise you can't get the write off this year. So I think that psychological effect that says here's something I can do about my taxes today. Will People won't do stupid things, but it'll drive
Right.
them to do things earlier than they would have otherwise.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good news. So
Let me also
yeah.
add though that in terms of the tax bill, again, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, and I don't like taxes, but I think it should have hit carried interest,
Right.
and which somehow always avoids the cut,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and they should have increased the rate on incomes over $1 million a year, and
Right.
why? Because I don't make a million, and but but if they had done those two things, it would have helped with
That's
the
the
deficit.
definition of high income, right? That's somebody who makes more than you.
Yeah, but it would have helped with the deficit, and that's good.
Yeah.
And it would have improved Republicans' chances in 2026 because the Democrats are going to say, the tax cuts for billionaires, tax cuts for
Yeah.
billionaires. They're going to say it over 100,000 times. And if the
Yeah.
Republicans say, "Hey, we raised the taxes on the people making more than $1 million a year," bam, it would have undercut that argument completely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, substantively, I agree with you, especially on the carried interest. It's ridiculous. It's good politics. Trump said he wanted it in the bill, and it sort of it disappeared one day. It just went poof. It's the magic of Congress. Uh, um, okay, so the next big item, like if you talk to Trump people in the administration, and you ask them, what are you doing about reshoring? What are you doing about manufacturing? One of the first things they talk about is energy, right? They say, we're going to have this amazing energy renaissance. It's going to lower the cost of energy massively, and the this is the stat you always hear. It may not have even be true, but because I've never actually seen the source, but I've heard it a million times, which is the biggest cost input to manufacturing after labor is energy. And so, the idea is we can't do much about labor, but if we lower the cost of energy dramatically, we make manufacturing more competitive. First of all, do you agree with the general assessment? And second of all, do you have a view on the administration's energy policies?
First, let me parse something you said. You said we can't do much about labor costs. The best way to, the only reason our labor cost is a problem is because our labor cost is higher than in the other countries. And the
Right,
way to bring our labor cost per hour closer to theirs is to reduce the value of the US dollar by 10 or 20%, which would make our wages closer to theirs in terms of
right,
cost. And so there's something you can do about it. But in terms of energy, I'll differentiate. I'll dig into a couple of things. First, oil and gas, which is what they're
yeah,
mostly talking about,
yeah,
and you can't reduce the price too much. I mean, it's already pretty low for oil and for gas, I think, and you get it too low, and the U.S. drilling becomes uneconomic, and then you put tens of thousands of people out of work because they're not drilling and they're not making equipment, they're not doing. So I don't think you're going to
interesting.
drive that down enough to make a lot of difference.
Okay,
And plus, the price of oil is fairly uniform worldwide because it's so easy to ship it. So it's
Yep.
very fungible, and so if we pumped enough to get the price here down to $40 a barrel or something, well, the price would go down to $40 a barrel in China also, or maybe
Right.
45 or something. So you haven't helped your competitive situation very much.
Right.
So um, I think less renewables saves money, so that's good. To me, nuclear is the key, and
Yeah.
there's been a lot of talk on nuclear permitting, big companies investing in nuclear. So helping that, permitting that, making that happen, to me is the key because that will keep our electricity costs low, and
Yeah.
electricity. Finally, it turns out that energy is only about 1 or 2% of manufacturing cost. Energy
Yeah.
as electricity, as heat, as thermal, that kind of thing. Now, if you think of um, natural gas becoming polyethylene, becoming polypropylene, becoming plastic resin, becoming plastic parts, then now energy is material, or gas is material, but that's not energy anymore. That's material. So
Right.
I'm excluding that from that calculation.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, the nuclear thing is a whole. You know, it for me who theoretically follows this stuff for a living. It's very hard for me to know what's actually happening because there's the permitting stuff is real and very important, but the problem is nuclear. It's a huge capex, upfront capex. I'm sorry, capital expenditure.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
I went to business school. I know you're a business guy, but not everybody who listens is a business guy. So if you want to build a nuclear plant, the energy is very cheap to produce, but you have to spend a lot of money upfront. And the problem with that is that the private sector alone usually can't come up with the money, and so you need some sort of government support, whatever that is, loan guarantees or tax credits or actual funding, which we did for the Chips Act. So anyway,
But the nuclear is being funded by, I can't remember, Amazon, Microsoft, some of the people that need the electricity to run their AI server farms, kind of thing. To get it, they're putting billions of dollars into energy, including nuclear,
yeah,
and 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 the Chinese I think are building one a month or something like that of these micro nuclear facilities, the kind you can almost ship around on a truck, and it powers a city.
right,
And when you get down to that, you make it a thing in a factory and you ship it to where you want it. Now the cost, that capital capex that you're talking about, comes down dramatically. It becomes small pieces. You put them where you need them, and so I think, um, in effect, as we do this, as we start making these small nuclear plants, and we start making one a month, then I would say we've reshored the production of nuclear that other countries have been doing very well, and we've been doing very poorly for 30 years. So I see it as an additional opportunity for reshoring.
yeah. I mean, that's the dream scenario. Whether it will happen just because you lift a few permitting rules, because those small nuclear reactors, that technology is it's unproven. So I it's it's I agree with you, but it's unclear to me whether it'll happen. Anyway, it's good. I'll be putting it down. Harry Moser of Reshoring Initiative says build more nuclear if you want more factories in the US. Amen. Amen to that 5 times. Um other topic is the regulatory stuff, which is we talked about it on on the energy side, but there's this broad deregulatory effort going on in the Trump administration. Again, like have you seen effects? Do you think that do you think that regulation is a big obstacle to reshoring, or is it mostly a sideshow?
It's very difficult to quantify. because and it's also hard to say, when is a regulation, especially EPA or OSHA, when is it excessive? How dirty, what's the parts per million of some chemical where
Right.
somebody's at risk, and that's very hard to do. So to me, the best thing is to cut the bureaucracy, cut the paperwork, speed up the permitting, do all the things that create inefficiencies rather, but don't necessarily increase exposure or risk. In terms of our survey, we asked the companies, and again, the OEMs and the contract manufacturers. The contract manufacturers put as their highest priority deregulation, and the
Interesting.
OEMs put it on a much lower scale. And I think that's because the OEMs both have the people, the resources, or whatever
Right.
to deal with the issue, and they've got the quantities and the predictability of producing a
Right.
given product, so they can justify spending $1 million for a pollution control. Whereas the job
Right.
shop gets an order today or could get an order today from the big company, but they don't know if they're going to get another order a month from now. So how can you go out and spend $1 million if you don't have that certainty in terms of the demand?
Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, that's the classic sort of uh, free market libertarian argument against regulation, which is that regulation helps the big guys because they've got the lawyers and they can influence the writing of the regulation and so on and so forth. It's always interesting where you read something in a think tank report and you don't know if it's true, and then you see it in the real world and you're like, oh, it's actually true. Okay.
Sometimes.
What?
Sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, and sometimes it's totally fake. But
uh,
that's why I do this job. Like, my job, when I do it well, is exactly this. It's like taking the think tank stuff and then investigating and finding out which parts of it are operative in reality, whether that's political reality or actual reality, and which parts are just some guy's ideas. Um, uh, Next topic, and I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart. That's a topic I've wanted to discuss with you for a long time because we didn't really talk much about it last time. And it's a very important topic. You mentioned it, which is workforce reskilling, skills, and so on. It's absolutely crucial. Everybody knows that it's crucial. I don't think that the Trump administration has done anything in particular. Um, I, first of all, like, talk about the importance of reskilling, and then we can discuss, what should be done, what's been done, and so on and so forth.
okay. So in our survey, we asked the both groups of companies, but I'll focus on the OEMs. We asked what impact would each of these policies have on the percentage of the work that you now import that you would reshore? And um, we asked them about uh, cutting corporate tax rates from 21 to 15%. We asked them about massive deregulation, about a lower US dollar, about 15% tariffs on everything, and about having a sufficient quantity and quality of skilled workforce. And by a significant margin, they picked the skilled workforce as having more impact on their future reshoring than any of those other things. And the other things are much more visibly discussed, much hotter topics. And so and it's clear that makes sense, because if you want to do something like what I want, which is 40% increase, which is more or less what Trump, he's never quantified it, but that's reindustrialization would have to be something like that. You need millions and millions more workers, and you're going to get new equipment. You need higher skills. You need smarter kids going into those trades. I call them professions, and um, and so it's got to be done. But the challenge, the problem is that we have demographic constraints. So the sizes of the cohorts of the kids that are graduating from high school aren't big enough to
Yeah.
supply the nurses and the construction workers and the talk show podcast hosts and the the think tank guys, and they're and the tool makers and welders, and so society has to decide: are we just going to let things happen however they happen, or are we going to influence that? And so I say that the Department of Labor, Department of Education, should switch from college for all to a good career for all.
Yes.
We should have fewer college loans in over subsidized field. John, you want to become an anthropologist. Well, we already have 1 million unemployed anthropologists. No, we're not going to loan you money because we know you'll never pay it back. And and you'll never get a job in that field and you'll be unhappy. So instead, here's an apprenticeship that you could go into. Why don't you do that? And so fewer college loans, apprentice loans that could help subsidize that apprentice as he or she works their way up through the system, and I would direct most of the whatever federal money becomes available directly to the apprentices, to like a subsidy to
Right.
them, so to
Right.
speak, just like we've done with the college students. We've handed them money. Most of them thought they'd never pay it back, so it was in effect a subsidy. And we should, if we did the same thing for the apprentices, we'd be dramatically better off. The um, so I've met with the Department of Labor about 12 years ago, and they asked me how to get the workforce ready for reshoring. And I said, well, Department of Labor has to stop being part of the problem and become part of the solution. And I pulled up one of their charts that showed how income goes up with the number of degrees, and you make $1 million more lifetime income than if you were a high school graduate. I said, I thought you were responsible for the apprentice programs and for having the workforce we need. They said, yep. I said, well, here's your chart. Why don't you show the average income of apprentices being about equal to that for bachelor's degrees, so that the students, the guidance counselors, the parents can say, let's see, no tuition,
Yeah.
start making money when you're 18, a
Yeah.
solid career, equivalent income. Hey, that's a damn good thing. And they put a couple of notes in the footnote of the chart for me. If anybody out there is at Department of Labor, Department of Education, I'd love to work with you to get that apprentice income right there so that everybody could see it. And I'm convinced that this least expensive, most impactful thing that any of us could do to get the workforce we need.
Right. Uh, so I have so many questions about this. First of all, what kind of skills are we talking about? Is it really like manual skills, or is it so another person I interviewed is somebody who runs a semiconductor company, and he was telling me like the biggest obstacle to building semiconductors in the US is process engineers. And so the US has great, PhD level CPU designers, and it's got okay manual laborers, but you also need process engineers in the labor force, and it's that mid tier that the U.S. doesn't do. So is it like skilled? Is it white collar, or is it really blue collar skills that we're talking about? Especially as more and more of this stuff is done by robots and so on.
Yeah, it's more blue collar than white collar, I believe, and there's certainly shortages of engineers, but somehow they find the engineers, but it's very hard to find the tool makers, welders, precision machinists, people who need to be just as smart as
Yeah.
many degree people, and who program machines and robots
Right.
and to do complicated things, and and are responsible maybe for a $5 million machine,
Right.
so significant responsibilities, and yet that's not positioned as professional, as beneficial, as impactful a career as working for an insurance company, or
Right. Right.
something like
Right.
that. Yeah. But the actual mix of the jobs depends very much on the industry. It's one thing in a foundry. It's a different one in a machine shop. It's different in a chip place like you're talking about. And what it brings to mind is Steve Jobs once was asked, why don't you make those iPhones here? And he said, well, It's the engineers, and he meant more like tool makers and people
Right.
process design, more or less like you're talking about. He
Right.
said in the U.S. I can't fill this room with that kind of skilled people. I can't find it.
Right.
Whereas in China, I can fill cities with people like that.
Right. Right. Well, but I'm sure that's partly true, but also partly it's a more acceptable answer than saying slave labor is cheap. But
But these guys aren't slaves anymore. They're making for a China living standard, they're probably making $10 an hour or something like that, which in China is a pretty good living wage
yeah, but
because things are
they
cheaper.
don't
Yeah.
they don't set their hours. They're not allowed to move. They're not allowed to change jobs. They're not allowed to move to a different
Nah,
city.
nah. I think you're wrong. Maybe the ladies that are sitting there putting the chips or the things into the iPhones. Maybe that's tough. But these engineers are in big enough demand that I think they have a lot of opportunities, and specifically in terms of changing jobs at the New Year's. When they all go away, they go back to the village,
Right.
and something like a third of them don't come back to the factory they're working at because they found a better job somewhere else, and they go somewhere else.
Okay.
So there
Interesting.
is flexibility. Yeah.
Interesting. So I was reading an article about Indiana because apparently Indiana has been doing this big push on apprenticeships, and as you know, it's a manufacturing state. It's part of that whole Great Lakes manufacturing hub. And one of the things in the story was basically companies saying, "Look, this. I mean, the problem is this just costs too much because it's like, okay, I understand I need skilled people over the long run, but in the meantime, I'm having to spend money to." Employ somebody who can't do the job. I'm having to spend time teaching them the job, and so it sounds very nice in theory, but I don't have the cash flow and the bandwidth to do it. um
That's why we call for apprentice loans. So what happens if you want to get a smart high school graduate? You got to pay them, I know, $15 an hour or something to work, and half the time, the first couple of years, they're at the community college being trained, getting paid while they're sitting there, and you're paying the tuition. And when they're at the factory, they got a master who's helping them and train them, make sure so that they're not especially productive. And the employer might say that at the end of that apprenticeship, they lost money on that apprentice. And then GE or GM or Ford or somebody hires them away for $5 more an hour. And the employer says, well, I'm never going to do that again. So what we recommend is apprentice loans where instead of paying them 15, the employer would pay them $10 an hour. The apprentice would borrow $5 an hour, which would turn out to be 10,000 a year, 40,000 over 4 years. And at the end of the apprenticeship, if the apprentice stayed on with the company, the employer would pay off that loan over the next 5 years or something like that. So you have an incentive for the employer to take a chance on the apprentice, and you've got a good living wage for the apprentice working for the employer.
that's good. So there's this
And
thing
you
in
probably
France.
get more of the loan paid back than you do with college loans.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There's this thing
let,
in
let, let, me
France.
let me
Yeah.
let me add two other things on workforce. The President Trump a month and a half ago signed an executive order on workforce,
Yep.
and I was pleased to see that. And it includes a call for up 1 million apprenticeships.
Yep.
And but it's insurance companies, it's all kinds of things. But to the extent that they do that, that's great. He's had a call out for ideas for what to do. I tried to send my ideas in through NAM, National Association of Manufacturers. I hope they
Yep.
made it. But anybody out there who has input to that, I'd love to provide some ideas. Another interesting bit, in addition to these high skilled jobs, there clearly are low skilled jobs that are needed, the grunt or the starter, the beginner kind of person. And so in our survey, we asked about the deportation of all illegals, which is a Trump policy at various times. And the survey said that 22% of the OEMs would be severely negatively impacted if that happened.
Yeah. Okay. That's, you know.
Relevant, because you need those people too. It's not they're not all
Yeah, I mean
rocket scientists. Yeah.
yeah, I mean this gets into broader issues. The retort to that is that they're just going to have to learn to adapt and to pay higher wages for to Americans.
And then their costs will be even less competitive with the imports.
Right, right,
To me, the right answer isn't that. The right answer is to have a good system for legally bringing people in, well
right.
documented, safe, non criminal, with some kind of skills, ready to work, and that's the alternative uh,
Right,
to take
right,
care of the
right.
future. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to run an idea by you. There's this policy in France called taxe d'apprentissage, so literally apprenticeship tax. Of course, the French are very good at inventing taxes. But this one is pretty clever, and like the French do, it's not as good as Germany and Switzerland, but the apprenticeship system is pretty good. Certainly better than the U.S. And basically, the way this tax works, so it's a corporate tax, but it doesn't go to the government. It goes to the apprentice training center of that company's choice in their region, and so it's almost like a voucher. And so it creates this sort of system where um, uh, these apprenticeship training centers, are soliciting companies for funds, and the companies are going, well, I'm going to give you, I have to pay this tax anyway. I just have to choose who to give it to. And your apprentices or your training is relevant to what I'm doing, and therefore I'm going to pay the money to you. And it's a way of funding, of letting the market decide where the apprenticeship money goes and where the subsidies go. Um, do you have thoughts on that?
And does the employer get any benefit, like he gets to send apprentices to the places where he sent money, or that's a separate transaction?
No, it's a separate transaction.
Okay. Well, first, I like the idea,
I mean,
and
legally anyway, but of course, you have a relationship with.
sure, I understand. So I like it because, as I mentioned before, the reason there are not more apprentices is because companies are afraid, because so few companies have apprentices, that the few who
Right,
have them are afraid of losing them to those who were not, smart enough or diligent enough to have them. And
right,
so in effect, what the system you're describing sounds to me that they're creating a safety net, or they're spreading the burden of having the apprentices out across all of the employers. And so whether the employer has an apprentice or not, it has to pay the tax. Well, as long as I pay the tax, I might as well have an apprentice.
right,
Okay, so,
exactly.
so to me, I think it's a good idea, and the other thing is, I wouldn't want, like I say, I wouldn't want too much of the money to go into the bureaucracy of the training center. I would want as much as possible to go into the pocket of the apprentice, so you could
Right,
attract smarter kids and more of them into the system.
right. Okay, fair enough. Um, any anything else you want to say about this issue, because it is very important, and it's so
About
huge.
workforce.
Yeah,
Um, I'll just repeat it. It's the number one issue. If you don't do that, you can do all the tariffs, all the currency, all the regulate deregulation you want, and there's not going to be anybody there to to do the
right.
work.
Okay, fair enough. Uh, okay, last question. Last meaty question, and then I have weird questions. Last serious question. So we talked about this a little bit. JD Vance gave this speech at this event called the American Dynamism Summit, and basically it sort of laid out his theory for why all of this stuff is really important and why it's important for society as a whole and not just manufacturing. And the basic idea is, macroeconomically, labor and capital are substitutes. And so the lower the price of labor is, the more the incentive is to uh, buy labor rather than capital. And of course, as labor has gotten cheaper because of globalization and immigration and all of that, corporate investment has gone down. And so the idea is you raise wages through restrictions on immigration, through tariffs, through tax cuts, through other measures. This in turn encourages investment in labor saving technologies. And so more investment means higher productivity, which means higher wages. And it's sort of this positive flywheel that sort of powers the economy. Um, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, I'd point out that even though China's wages are about 30% of ours, they're investing multiples as much in robots, computer controlled machinery, new factories, et cetera, such that right now it may very well be that their installed factory base is more modern, more productive, more whatever than ours is, starting
Right.
from almost nothing 20 years ago. And and if you look at the productivity, labor productivity in manufacturing in China is reported to be growing at 6% per year. And in the US, has grown a total of not much more than 1% total over the time period from 2010 to the present. So in 15 years, we've done nothing in terms of productivity, despite all the talk about robots and AI
Right.
and all this other stuff. So whatever we're doing clearly is not working. And if you want to be a high wage country, you clearly have to do well at productivity. But I say that productivity, automation, et cetera, is a necessary but not sufficient condition. Some of you may remember that from philosophy class. And so if you don't get productive, you certainly can't compete. But getting as productive as you can get isn't doesn't improve your relative position to say to China because they're putting in as much as they can get
Right.
and they're doing it smarter and faster than we are. So I think of it like Alice in Wonderland. So some of you may remember how I think the Queen said you have to run as fast as you can just to stay even, kind of thing. And so we have to run faster than we can if productivity is going to improve our competitiveness relative to countries like China, Korea, et cetera. So one of my takeaway thoughts is I've seen people, even smart people, come out and say, "Well, we should tax the robots. We should otherwise they're going to take away all the jobs." And my view is that we will lose more jobs to automation that takes place in China and Korea if we
Right.
do not automate because
Right.
we won't be competitive than we
Right.
will to automation that takes place here. So I say go for it. We should be emphasizing productivity and automation any way we can.
Yeah. I mean, my line on this is a factory where 90% of the work is done by robots is more manufacturing jobs than no factory at all.
No factory, and if say it's an assembly plant, say it's an automotive assembly plant, I I think uh, 80 or 90% of the value added comes from their supply chain scattered all over the
Right.
country. Okay,
Right.
and so if you don't have that auto assembly plant, even if the auto assembly plant has no people working in it, you've
Right.
got all those hundreds or thousands of other companies that are making all the
Right.
pieces that are coming together, and unless they've gotten equally productive, which is much less likely, then you're
Right.
still going to have tens of thousands of jobs scattered around the country.
Right. Yeah. That's couldn't put it better. Okay, so I understand that you have a call to action you want to put out there.
First, if you don't mind, let me hit a couple other insights from the 2025 Reshoring survey. So, first, 42% of the companies, the OEMs, said they would pay 5 to 20% more for components that had 1 week delivery versus 6 week delivery, 6 weeks being typical from China to,
Yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah.
Chicago. Okay, so companies should be focusing on getting the work out of their factories super fast so they can deliver so much faster than China that their customers will buy from them.
In his
Um,
grave, like old rat is smiling.
in fact, I've been talking to one of his apostles last week. The 32% of companies still plan to offshore,
Okay.
overwhelmingly because of lower costs, on average about 26% lower than the US. Now, reshoring is coming from China 32%, Taiwan 11%, Southeast Asia 23%. So still, lot coming from there. Companies are placing much higher priorities on profitability than on community, country, or things like ESG. The
Okay.
highest priorities for reshoring are having engineering near manufacturing so they can work together as a team easily,
Right.
reducing the freight and duty, and geopolitical risk. So we put out about a year ago a geopolitical risk map that shows the probability of decoupling with each country. And so we encourage companies to look at that and say, what would happen if we got cut off from them?
Right.
How would we survive? And the answer is don't wait till then. Bring the work back now. Um,
Right. Right.
uh, so things like that I think are important. So you were uh, we were talking about a call to action, and so anybody out there who has access to the administration, we've got we've got our survey data, which would help make good decisions. We've got something called the competitiveness toolkit that calculates the jobs that would come back for each of various policy actions. We've got all kinds of data about reshoring, and I believe we could help the administration pick the right actions and get even better publicity for it. So if anybody can connect me, I'm harry.moser at reshorenow.org. Send me an email, say, Harry, I can get, you send me something, I'll get it through to somebody. I'd love to hear from you.
All right. I know for a fact that there are people listening to this who are in that position, and I hope they'll follow up on it. All right. So we end each of our podcasts with a traditional question for our guest, and the question is this: recommend a book. It can be any book, new, old, and so on and so forth, but it cannot be in your area of expertise. So any book, what's any book you want to recommend, but not about manufacturing or supply chains or trade or.
Probably the best series I've read is the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov,
Oh,
in
that's a
which
great recommendation.
he posits a future empire, and and the empire is collapsing, and he comes up with a method to forecast what's going to happen in the future, and helps move things in the right direction so that when the collapse occurs, it recovers quickly as possible with the least possible damage. So not too much action in the book, but a lot of insights, and I think so. Yes. Delighted to help. Look forward to help from anybody. Anybody just wants help on something else, contact me. If I can help you with what you need to get done, send me an email. Bye, Pascal. Thanks.